Hey, what's up, everybody? It's time for another episode of the ResGen Giving Life podcast, where we hear stories and have conversations about life in Christ, everyday discipleship, and ways that we as men can give life to others. My name is Tom Henderson, the founder of ResGen, and I am pumped that you're joining me today. Before I introduce you to today's guest, I want to remind you that we drop a new episode every other Thursday. So if you've not done so yet, I encourage you to hit that subscribe or follow button so that you'll be notified each and every time a new episode is available. Also, if you haven't taken a minute to rate or review the podcast, I would greatly appreciate it if you would do so, as it is a super easy way to help us grow both our audience and our impact. All right. My guest today has been helping people develop intentional cultures for over 15 years. Vani Harari is the co-founder of Think3D and the co-author of Think3D, a radical new approach to maximizing the potential of your team. Vani is also a highly active leader in the community of Sioux Falls, having been on the Human Relations Commission for over 10 years. In addition, he is also the vice chair and an executive board member of both the Downtown Sioux Falls Board of Directors and the Downtown Sioux Falls Rotary Club. On today's show, Vani and I talk about all things culture, what it is, how it impacts all aspects of our lives, and how we can be intentional about building healthy and thriving ones. We also talk about how culture influences our ability to both find and retain employees, and how we can all love people better, including ourselves. Trust me when I say that this episode is going to be full of great information and what I call nuggets of wisdom that can be applied at work, at home, and throughout your community. Here's my conversation with Vani Harari. Well, Vani, dude, welcome to the Giving Life podcast.
Yeah, man, this is big time.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be here. This is the real deal.
Well, here's the deal. I mean, this is season 3, and your counterpart, Tamian, was in here season 1, and so we got all the riffraff out of the way to prepare for your arrival.
You got to up the ante a little bit. You know what I mean? Season 3, you got to take it up a notch, so I appreciate it.
Oh, that's so good. All right, so, Vani, a lot of listeners will know at least pieces of you, like they've maybe seen you in the community, of course, but we've got a lot of other listeners and viewers that are not from the Sioux Falls area. So real quick, I think just before we even get going into some stuff, I think you should just quickly introduce yourself. Talk about you're married, and then what makes you tick right now? What's going on in your world?
So Vani Harari, I'm the co-founder of a company called Think3D. I come here originally from Buffalo, New York. Moved here in my younger teenage years, went to high school here. And at the time, it was the number one place to live here. My uncle was out here for some military stuff.
Okay.
And Buffalo definitely wasn't the number one place to live at that point in time. And so my uncle called back and said, hey, it's safe here, it's clean here. These people leave their cars running with their purse on the front seat. He's like, they don't lock their doors. And, we have bars on our windows type of thing. And so, my mother wanted to give it a shot. So we came out here with the family. A couple of my uncles came out with their families, and we gave it a go. And for me, it just kind of stuck. And I love the idea of how malleable Sioux Falls was and how I could, be able to influence it. And so I kind of stuck around, met my wife. We've been with each other for around 20 years, been married for 11.
Got it.
So we're still running that way. And then I met my business partner who I've been friends with for over 20 years. And so all of the people in my life have been there for quite a long time. And now we're here.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I already mentioned Tamian. You just talked about your business partner. And so a few years ago, how many years ago did you and Tamian launch Think3D?
6 years.
Okay. But before it launched, there's always the conversations, the ideation stage, the creativities that you guys get together and kind of dream about it, leaving what, you're doing on your own to converge on something together. When did those conversations start?
Yeah. Well, actually years and years before, probably 5-6 years before, where we talked about the idea of just consulting. And that was probably a little bit more my flow, because where Tamian is reserved, I'm reckless. And so
that's a perfect partnership.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, because, for him, 6 figures, senior leader, all of those type of things, worked himself up by doing the right thing. I'm a visionary, wild personality, somebody's going to speak their voice and that type of thing. So the way that I found myself to leadership was was different. It was really trying to carve out my own path. And I knew that in order for me to be fully realized, that it was going to be in the space that I helped create, and that it wasn't going to be in a situation where I was going to fit inside somebody else's, box. It just wasn't going to be my thing. And so it was part, me getting, Tamian to believe that we could do this thing, and then Tamian being practical and rational on how we should do it. So, we were talking about all of these things, and we had for a while, and we would go on these road trips, and both of our wives are close. And we would go on these road trips, and we'd be sitting in the front, and they would be sick about us talking about business, and we'd be sick of them talking about whatever show or whatever. And so we ended up just kind of being in our own little world, a lot of, windshield time. And we started talking about the commonalities, the frustrations, different things we were experiencing in our workplace and what we wanted to do. And we started putting it into practice. Then once we started working with our teams, we said, okay, we really might be on to something. So we met about a year prior to us writing the book. We met every Monday for about 4 hours at his house, just us together going back and forth, channeling things. And eventually we got into something that we thought was really valuable.
Yeah. And so as you got to the launching stage of Think 3D, one of the taglines of Think 3D is we build intentional cultures. So you were seeing a problem in the work environment, in the work culture, and said, we think we can help that. We think we can build healthier work cultures, healthier relationships in the workplace and all that kind of thing. So what does Think 3D do? And what do you mean by we build intentional cultures?
Yeah. What we do is $1 million question. Because no one really knows what we do. And we kind of like it like that a little bit, because when we talk about culture, we're touching a bunch of different things, right? So when we talk about building intentional culture, it just means creating environment and relationship on purpose. And so how do we develop the leaders, and how do we create the environment for healthy interactions to happen? And a lot of times people don't do that on purpose. They assume that even good people, if you bring a bunch of good people into a space, good things will happen. And that might be true in the most general sense, but in the technical sense of how humans deal with each other, that's just not the case. And what we always tell people, if you want to do anything better, do it on purpose. And so when we communicate on purpose, when we love each other on purpose, when we support each other on purpose, when we forgive on purpose, teach each other on purpose, the likelihood that we get the desired result is exponentially higher. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to put the people back into organizations, and that there's no place that a person should be asked to exist where they're not thought of, treated, and loved as a person. And a lot of times people had gotten comfortable with the idea of going to work and not being thought of as a person, leaving it at the door, so to speak. And that's what we wanted to challenge. As such, it requires that we touch a lot of different things: the internal communications, the leadership, the training, development, all of those different type of things. So we touch a lot of stuff, which makes our, kind of business model a little bit unique.
Yeah. And I think there was this wave in corporate culture anyway for a while where it was like, what we just need to do is we just need to have better break rooms.
Right.
We just need to have a ping pong table,
right,
like a pool table, foosball. We need to have all those options. We have a fridge with just, soda and
free
LaCroix and snacks and all that. And then that will increase the amount of people, the way that employees like their jobs, or, that will make the culture better.
Right.
Would you agree, disagree, or say, yeah, that could be part of it, but it's definitely not the whole thing?
Small part of it, right? Even right now, we recognize that there is a part of it as we look at people wanting to work remote and things of that nature, where employers are going to have to be more thoughtful about creating a place where people want to spend time versus where people want to work, right? Because theoretically, if you just want people to work, you will want them to work where they work best, which for some people is at home, some people is at a coffee shop, some people is whatever. If you want people to work in your space, it has to be a space that people want to spend time, like a coffee shop, like their home, like their whatever. If it's not like that, then you can expect a little bit of challenge or pushback as people want to be in the spaces where they feel most comfortable. So that is the thing. But the bigger thing is number one, how do you develop people? How do you lead people? And the best way to get people to be someone who can be led is for them to be able to lead themselves. And we haven't done a good enough job of teaching people intrinsic leadership skills, right? Time blocking, delegation, management, really. But leadership skills in terms of confidence, self-talk, self-belief, how we challenge ourselves, how we forgive ourselves, how we give grace to each other. And it's so interesting because it's an intersection of all of those words that people wanted to scrub out of business are the very things that make it work,
Right.
which is forgiveness, grace, understanding, love, compassion.
Yeah, we're all about bottom line productivity.
Right.
But yet, if we want to see more productivity and stronger bottom lines and all of that,
You got to take care of the people.
you got to take care of the people.
Yeah, the goal is the byproduct. People got to understand the difference between the product and the byproduct, right? And the byproduct is something you could do while you're doing your job, essentially, you know? And the job is taking care of the people. That's the job, because that's our job in our communities. That's a job in our homes. That's a job in our churches. That's a job in our nation. That's a job in our world, to take care of people. People are the point. So whatever you do, whatever you make it or you do it for people.
Mm-hmm.
People are the point. The success that comes from taking care of people, the byproduct of that is going to be profit and all of those different type of things. And history has shown that when you do right by people, they will do right by you, and those things take care of themselves. And it has also shown that when you don't do that, you can make profit for a time, but you develop resentment, you develop frustration, people who harbor ill will, and then eventually that does what it does.
Right. So you mentioned just a second ago about how, you know, with the pandemic and with the different things, we had a lot more working from home. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a necessity, right? I mean, that was something that pretty much everybody had to move to for a time. And now we're seeing people come back to the office, and some people saying, well, I don't really want to come to the office. I work better at home. But then you can read some articles that say most people aren't really working at home. Like they're acting like they're working at home and all that kind of thing. What have you seen? Because obviously with Think 3D launching 6 years or so ago, you had about 4 years of that working environment.
Right.
And then it all of a sudden changed abruptly,
Right.
which caused you to have to think about, okay, how do we still influence these businesses in a completely different way?
Yeah.
Most of us through Zoom and all these other things. But what are some of the biggest things that you're seeing over, like I'd say, the last year as businesses are saying, boy, you know, it is time to come back? And in Sioux Falls, where you and I are located, it's a little different than New York.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, and by a little, I mean a lot.
Yeah.
North California or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's some that never worked from
Right.
home, just even still because of what it was. But what are some of the biggest things that you're seeing right now as far as in the workplace that maybe we've had to transition business mind-wise or people mind-wise out of the last difficult season that we had?
Right. I think you mentioned bottom line. And so for a lot of people in terms of working remote, if it was a matter of bottom line, in most cases in the bottom line, it stayed the same or it has increased, right? Now, what we don't want to confuse that with is me feeling like you're working or me seeing you work, which has been the case for a lot of folks, right? I go out and I observe and I see whether or not people are doing what I need them to do. But if you just look at the numbers, in most cases, the numbers are actually the same or better, right? For people who are working at home. The trick becomes, you know, what are you doing with all of that time? Now, this is interesting because even prior to the pandemic, when Gallup would ask leaders, you know, how much they thought people were working, you know, most come back at, 4 to 5 hours out of a 8-hour day that they thought people were actually working.
Okay.
So, like, no leader really thought that somebody was giving them a full 8.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And so even at home, that's still the case. Somebody's likely not giving you a full 8, but are they giving you a better 5? Right? And so that's part of it. The other piece is that, there was a conflating of working remote with working from home. Not everybody who wants to work remote wants to work from home. Some people know they're not effective at home, but they want to work remotely where there's, again, maybe at a coffee shop where there's light and there's energy and it's kinetic and people are moving versus being in a sea of cubes where they're not really talking to anybody or engaging with people. For me, that's the worst place I could be in.
Yeah.
I'm not effective in that place, and I don't feel good in that place. The other piece is the technical aspect, which is when I'm paying a person. So just by you staying at home, I might be paying you more because now you don't have a commute. Now your wardrobe kind of
you don't need pants, like like during the pandemic. Everyone's like, I just bought just a bunch of new shirts.
I mean, well, if you ask most people and you really think about it, you say for the majority of your wardrobe, what is this for? And they'll tell you work. That's where most of that money for their wardrobe went. The other piece of it is we're having a childcare epidemic where we don't have enough childcare, and that's a significant thing.
Yeah.
We're literally running into a situation where people are likely going to have to tell people to work remotely or from home so that you can take care of your kids and work, because it's going to be hard for you to find that piece of it. And then, so when you pile that all together in cities like New York and things of that nature, me not having to come into the city and do a 2-hour commute, me not having to get daycare and those type of things, you might be paying me $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 more by not requiring me to come into the office. So there's real, tangible, legitimate reasons why this is something we're talking about. But the other piece of it is a lot of people say they want their people to come back because they want to have the collaboration, they want to have the community, they want to have the culture. But when we go to ask the people, we say, how about this? And they say, well, what community, what culture? You didn't talk to me when I was there. And so that's the disconnect.
So there's a perceived culture.
There's a perceived culture there. And like we say, a culture will emerge whether intended or not. But if it's not one you invest in, it's going to be one that you pay for. So now what we're going to do is we're going to find it that it, does a pendulum swing a little bit, because once you're home 2-3 years, maybe you feel a little bit differently. But the big thing is just getting together and saying, where do you feel best? Where do you work best? And can we create that environment so we can be truly collaborative? And I think that's going to take some kind of a hybrid feel where when you come in, it's going to be for intentional, purposeful collaboration and connection. And anytime you're not doing that, you could be to your own devices. And I think that might be where we end up landing.
Yeah. One of the things that I think that we've seen more now than ever is just the fierce competition that's going on for employees, right? And I mean, where people are willing to jump ship. And I mean, we've seen this even just in this generation of workers, in that they're maybe, and it sounds bad when we say this, but they're maybe not as loyal to a company as like maybe our parents were. The times of hearing that somebody worked for the same company for 45 to 50 years and then retire, it's just you don't hear those stories much anymore. But now we're at a stage where, because of just the amount of wages going up and hourly pay and stuff, people will jump ship from a place they've worked for 2-3 years for an extra $1 an hour or something like that. So what would you say for the companies that are just trying to figure out how do they retain those employees? And I know that the difference of a part-time worker, like, my son's going to be a senior in high school now, so like for him, the $1 an hour is something that's just like, I mean, this ain't going to be my career anyway. But for some of these people, it really is their career, and this is their life's work, at least for a season. Yeah. What are you talking with those companies about for how their culture will keep those people and not getting them to jump?
Well, the big thing is, like, you got to reframe your entire thinking. In this idea of an employee being someone that works for you. People don't work for you. They work for their families. They work for their friends. They work for their futures. If you didn't come in, they still would. They don't work for you. They might report to you, but that idea that they work for you has to change. And that's always been something that people have been yearning for, because it's a partnership. This is where unions came in. It's not because people didn't necessarily care about the place they were working for, it's that they wanted leverage. And they just didn't feel leverage as an individual employee amidst this sea of employees, right? And that's the number one narrative complaint most people have about the workplace. They don't want to feel like a number, right? And so once people start to acknowledge that you're the business of you, even if you're in my employ, you're still your own business. You have everything that I have. You have expenses, you have accounts receivable, you have budgets, you have shareholders, you have stakeholders. Like, you have all of those same things. So when we're coming together, it's as partners. You're not doing me a favor, I'm not doing you a favor. And so once we get that in our minds, now we start to treat this like a real relationship. And like any relationship, what would keep your wife around? What would keep your friends around? What would keep your whoever around? Like, if you neglect them, if you don't give them love, if you're not listening to them, if you're not challenging them, if you're not teaching them, if you're not growing with them, that relationship is going to disintegrate. The same principles are true when it comes to the workplace. We just haven't treated it like that. And I think once people readjust to that, that'll change a lot of things. The other thing that I'll say about that in terms of keeping people around is that when we use terms like loyalty, the expectation was, as long as I pay you and it's not a bad job, you'll stay for however long. But when a person has so many different opportunities and now they actually have access to them and awareness of them because they're being thrust in their face and people are being recruited from across the world now.
Yeah.
Now we're at a situation where loyalty is a daily endeavor. Have I done enough today to earn your attendance tomorrow? And as we start thinking about people not as career people, but rather this is a relationship that is a daily pursuit. And I have to engage this person and warrant them spending their time here away from their families every single day. And when we think about it that way, now we have to develop leaders that can actually execute these type of things, which is one of the biggest issues, which is why so much of what we do in culture is leadership, because the way most organizations work is the most experienced person has the lowest span of control. So the CEO, who might have 30 years of experience, who might be really brilliant in what they're doing, has 5 direct reports. The person you hired yesterday has 15. We train the people who have the greatest span of control, who are dealing with the most novice people, the least. Those type of things have to change, where we have to give those people who are touching that person who's part-time or might only be there for 6 months the skill set to be able to recognize where that person is at, to be able to instill values in them, to be able to teach them skills. And then you have a much greater likelihood of being able to retain talent. Because bottom line is, people want to be where they feel the best and where they are cared for and where they are loved. Money is secondary. But when a person doesn't have that first thing, they're going to go for the second thing. And that's easier for people to give. But everybody's giving people money now. If you listen to the radio and you say, and somebody's talking about their pay, they always say, we pay competitive, which means we pay the same as everybody else. It's not really a differentiator. It's a reason, for me to go from one place to another.
So how do you assess your culture at work? So let's just say that you are a CEO of a company, or you're a mid-level manager, or a brand new employee. I mean, because anybody can assess what they think that culture, is, the health of that, or the toxicity, or whatever. But so how would you say, how do you assess that, Bonnie? How does someone say, I think our culture is good here?
And everyone says that. Right? Everyone says that. Because naturally what people just do whenever we engage with them is they defend themselves, right? They don't want to make it seem like they're not taking care of their people. And it's not really what it is. It's almost never malice. That's almost never the situation. What it is it's neglect. It's getting busy. It's we got a bunch of stuff to do, so we're not doing the little things. And so you can accomplish that by a couple ways: town halls, surveys, those type of things where you're hearing from the horse's mouth and people are telling you the things that frustrate them. But I got to tell you, nothing is going to give you a better read of what's happening than person to person. And so that I go back to those leaders that you have when you're doing one-on-ones, when you're working with your team. How is that information flowing? How is it getting up to where a CEO can know how this small team in a warehouse feels versus what they're producing? I can get that off a printout. This, I need human intel. I need organizational IQ. I need people to understand how this small team feeds into this really big machine. And that's just hard to do without having on the ground skills. It's just really hard to have without on the ground skills.
So does that mean that the leader has to build some margin in their schedule? Because the first thing that I think about is, just how our calendars fill up so quickly, from meeting to meeting to meeting, to this project, to this deadline, to this report that's needed or whatever. And so our days get so packed where, like, the minute you wake up, hopefully you've had a bowl of cereal and you've kissed your kids before you walk out the door or whatever. But then, you're in it. So, but what it sounds like, and it doesn't have to be necessarily, every day, every morning, every afternoon, or whatever, but it's just that there's purpose, there's intentional time that you're building in to say, I need to go and connect with my people, whether that be just your direct reports, or, that's going to vary how large your organization is.
For sure.
But is that what you're saying? It's got to kind of take?
You got to do the stuff. Because again, then let me go home. Right? This is the very point that people are saying. If you don't have time to engage me, why am I here? Why am I here? Like, I got a computer at home, I got a data at home, I got whatever. Why am I here? Because supposedly I'm here for the culture. But if you don't have time for me, and that literally is what is being communicated. One of the top frustrations that people have is leaders consistently and constantly rescheduling one-on-ones or meetings or canceling them altogether. Right? Because essentially, what does that say to you?
They're not important enough to keep the meeting.
Even worse, there's something more important.
Sure.
Not being important is one thing. Most people have developed some level of comfort with that. But having something be more important says something different, especially when you can see what the more important thing is.
Mm-hmm.
I had to go have a meeting about earnings. I had to go have this meeting about blah, blah. I had to go have this meeting about how we're repaving the parking lot. And that was too important for you.
The visual that comes to my mind as you say that is, we've all heard situations. We've seen. I remember seeing like a commercial where like a kid is waiting on the curb for their dad to come home to take him to go play baseball or whatever, and then the dad doesn't show, and then the kid is just distraught, right?
Yes.
Because something else was more important than the kid. And I always talk about it, and you've heard me say this before at some Res Gen stuff, is that, we're all just older teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
We're all just looking for love and acceptance and affirmation and all of that. And so that makes so much sense in what you're saying there, because as we see meetings get canceled, as we see these things that, push us to the back burner or the back seat, it just makes us feel like we're that kid on the curb.
100%. 100%. And, we always say, people care about kids until they grow up. Like, everybody loves kids, and we protect kids and take care of kids, but as soon as they grow up, we're done with them. And none of that changes. Just no part of that changes. Even going back to what we were talking about with work, when we talk about with people, one of the first things that we were asked to talk about was millennials. They were like, millennials, what do we do? and people were so whatever. But we would go talk to them and we would challenge people, and we would say, first of all, these are not pie people. They didn't fall from Mars. They're your kids. You raised them. And the way they feel about work is informed. So when you had a parent come home too tired to play catch or help with your homework, when your dad came home, plopped in the recliner, turned on the game, cracked open the beer, and maybe grunted at you a couple times in between innings, how do you feel about work? When we send this person to you, they were healthy and happy. You send them back a zombie. Why would I want to go there? Why would I want to dedicate my life to that? The way people feel about work right now is not out of the blue. It's not generational phenomenon. It is chickens coming home to roost. We have not been giving people what they need for the last 50, 60 years of our modern work environment. And now these are the results of it, where people are saying, I'm not doing that anymore. When we had young people tell us, people always complain, they would say, they want to come in, they want to get a pat on the back for everything, they want to leave at 5, they want to, hang out, they want to be with their friends.
And get paid $60,000 a year.
And they want to get paid $60,000 a year, and they want to be in the corner office in 3 years. And we were always like, so do you. You just convince yourself you don't get it, right? And a lot of this is just a reset. Now, is there a place in between that's realistic where we say, hey, you have to earn these things, but I'm going to teach you, I'm going to develop you, I'm going to give you every opportunity to. I'm not going to ask you to do it by yourself. Mm-hmm. Also, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have an expectation of you, that you don't just come to this environment expecting it to be right for you, that you make it right for you and you make it right for others. Mm-hmm. You make it right for me. Even though I'm the leader, how you treat me affects how I come in. Yeah. How many people have actually gone into their leader's office and said, thank you for leading us. We appreciate you taking all of these, these lumps for us. We appreciate you trying to figure out how to feed 150 people or 1,000 people when I only have to try to figure out how to feed myself and my family. Thank you for doing that. Very rarely.
Yeah.
And so the expectation is not just down or across, it's up as well. It's saying, I'm going to do my best to take care of you, but you got to think of me as a human as well. Mm-hmm. And that's what we mean by organizational IQ.
Yeah, and I think that that's super important, Vonnie, because I think a lot of times they always say it's loneliest at the top, right? Mm-hmm. And the leader feels lonely. Mm-hmm. And, I'm busy doing, like I told you, my youngest son is a senior now this year. So this summer we were doing college visits. And I remember one of the chairs of the department that we were meeting with at one of the schools said, look, we are going to raise the bar of expectations for you as a student with where you're attempting to go. Mm-hmm. But we are going to help you get to that bar. Yes. We're not just going to expect it and say, okay, now get it done, son. But we're going to help you get there. But I think that what you just said is so important as well to think about. Okay, so how do you build into that mid-level manager, the newest of employees that's saying, man, it really is relationship, not just top to the bottom, and that they're taking care of me, but how do we take care of each other? Which I would say is not necessarily the mindset of someone coming in. to the organization. They may be thinking more like, okay, how do I impress them? How do I prove my worth, my value? Because then that's going to what? It's going to yield promotion, accolades, bonus, or whatever. So, so that's an interesting.
Your contribution to this environment culturally is as important as any other thing you bring to it, because that creates a fertile environment for everyone to be successful. You could be a great earner. We've all seen this, especially if you've been in a sales environment. Sometimes the person who sells the most gets carte blanche. They could do kind of whatever.
Sure.
Right? And they make it so that you might lose 3, 4, 5, 6 salespeople because they make a toxic environment. And there's nothing that person is going to be able to do that justifies all of that loss, all of that brain drain. And that's one of the first things you got to carve out and be honest and say. We have 3 non-negotiables when we engage a client. 1, everyone's in the boat. We're not just here to fix them. You have to be a part of it as well. If you feel like you're above the train, it's not going to work. 2, just because you pay us doesn't mean we work for you. We're going to hold you accountable. We're going to challenge you just like you expect us to challenge them. And then lastly, you got to be willing to let go of your top performer because they're undermining the culture. Because if there's enough a person can do or make that justifies them diminishing the experience for everybody else, you're not interested in a healthy culture. So if you want to do that, we could work with you. If you don't want to do that, it's not going to work because it won't. Mm-hmm. And those are the type of principal things. The other thing that I'll just touch on, like you mentioned, is I think even parents need to be considerate of this. We don't teach children how to love back all the time, right? And sometimes we say, love you, love you, love you, love you, love you, and we don't let them know that we need it. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't let young people know that we have to have that. And I think that stunts their growth when they get into other situations where they feel like everybody, quote unquote, above them is good and that it just flows this way. And that's what makes it really tough, is that a lot of times we don't connect people with that piece of it and say, I need love too. And here's how I need to be loved. And start to teach people how to love intentionally. Teach people how to be there for other people intentionally and not just assume because they're in it. Now, we hurt ourselves sometimes because we want to be stoics. We want to be stoic leaders. We want to be stoic parents. But when you were young and one of your siblings or a cousin would pinch you and you said that didn't hurt, what would they do?
Do it again.
They would pinch your heart,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Because it's hard for people to have affection for you when they don't know that they can affect you. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we teach stoicism and we all got it together and da-da-da-da-da-da. People never learn how to take care of you because you give them the impression you're already taken care of.
Right. Yeah. And we see that as like, as a parent, if we say, hey, I need that same kind of love from you, or, you know what, I need that kind of love from my coworkers or whatever, that's a sign of weakness.
Yes.
Or we're frail or we don't have it all
sensitive
together.
And you're small and you're blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it's just, it is so preposterous because it's biological. It's written in our DNA that we need these things. And to deny ourselves these things is what moves, is the weakness, right? Not being able to be vulnerable is the weakness. Not being able to say what you need is the weakness. Because at the end of the day, not having those things is going to leave you diminished. And if you're not strong enough to do what's necessary to keep you strong, then you're naturally weak or you'll weaken. And that's the thing, is that when I'm being vulnerable, when I'm telling people I need something, it's not because I'm weak, it's so that I stay strong. Because I know if I don't have this, I'll break. Or even worse, I'll callous. Mm-hmm. And I'll become cold and I'll become jaded and I'll become cynical.
Yeah, we don't have any of those. We don't have any of that in our culture right now, do we?
Right. We got a couple. And what a horrible existence that is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this was something that I was going to ask you a little bit later, but I think that that kind of set the table for, something that's kind of your, one of your biggest motivators and one of your personal missions is to help people love better.
Yeah.
And in order to love other people better, a big part of that is learn how to love ourselves.
Yeah.
And so, why do you think that people, this is kind of a basic question, but why do you think people struggle loving themselves?
I think for a couple reasons. I think one, the way we've warped the idea of humility and the way we have warped the idea of arrogance. And, we've made it so right now, if you were to Google the definition of humility, it would say having a lower modest view of one's own importance, right? And I think that's a ridiculous definition. And I think some people really behave under that definition because nobody benefits from you not feeling like you're important. Well, there's one group of people. people who want to control you or take advantage of you.
Sure.
Outside of that, no one benefits from you not thinking you're important, because people don't take care of things they don't think are important. They don't fight for things they don't think are important. They don't stand up for things they don't think are important. So I think that's one. I think the other thing is understanding the idea of arrogance or healthy confidence. So when people think about ego, they think about it purely as something negative, but it's really just the way we see ourselves. And the reality of it is that, perfect balance is a needle point. We almost never reach it. And if we do, it's only for a short period of time. And so you're going to be too much of something, right? And so for me, if I got to choose between being, too reserved or too subdued versus being too confident, I'm going to choose too confident 100% of the time. Because I ask people, what's the right amount of confidence? They're like, I don't know. Right. No one does. So if I'm going to be something, I'm going to be that. So I think that's part of it. People are trying to ration confidence. I don't want to say that because I don't want to look like I don't want to. And once you get into that thing where you're self-editing all the time, you're going to come up with a lesser version. And some people don't know how to edit as much as they hack away, right? They treat it like an ice sculpture where you can't put any of it back, versus clay, which I think is always how we think about the metaphor that we use when we think about God is molded.
We're constantly being formed, yeah.
Yeah, you're constantly being formed and changed. It's not so much that you're being stripped away. It's not so much you're being broken down, but rather being formed. And sometimes you need a little bit more of this, a little bit less of that. So I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing in terms of self-love is that it feels selfish. And I think we have to change that dynamic. Where selfish is not necessarily, I don't care about you. Selfish is sometimes just about me being focused on me. Right now, I do staycations sometimes, or solocations, where I'll just go someplace by myself. And the conversation I had with my wife is like, I need you to understand that this is not about me wanting to not be with you. This is about me wanting to be with me. And I need to get used to hearing my voice. And so many people have never heard their voice. Mm-hmm. They've never sat still enough to hear their voice. They've never had the courage to hear their voice. And so all of the things that they hear are manifestations from their parents, society, this, that, or the third. And they don't even know what they sound like. And so I just don't think there's a lot of trust in people's voices because they don't know how to carve it out of all of the noise. Mm-hmm. And that's a process. It's a process. And sometimes it's a difficult process. But when a person finds it and you find your voice, it just becomes holistically different because now I'm not insecure. And people, let me just give you this real quick. If you have a gas stove at home, right, and you're not sure that you turned it off, no matter how good whatever I'm saying is, what are you going to be focused on?
That stove.
Right. Now, it could be off, but you don't know it's off.
Right.
You're insecure about it. And when a person's in insecurity, they're consumed by it. They don't have the space to be concerned about what's happening outside of it because it's consumed. And that insecurity that people have within themselves, within their hearts, is what makes them walk into a room, hear people giggle, and convince themselves that they're laughing at them outside of the trillion things they could be laughing at. Mm-hmm. It's in that insecurity that makes you think that the whole city is working against you to keep you late in traffic. It's insecurity that makes you come to work and feel like somebody else came to work to ruin your day. It's when we're in that insecurity that we can't give to people because we are so afraid that we don't have enough or we're not enough. Mm-hmm. And that is what goes into a lot of things that challenge self-love.
Right, which, of course, in turn then impacts the way that we look at people, have the ability to love people.
100%.
Because if we can't figure out what's going on in here, which I think there is, our mind oftentimes, partially just because of the way that our world works, a lot of times it goes to the negative.
Yeah.
Where you do, you just walk into that room like you said, and boy, am I gonna when I go to lunch today, am I gonna be sitting alone at the lunch table?
Yep.
And maybe it's because they're all mad at me.
Yep.
Or whatever the case.
It's got to be you.
So then that impacts the way that we view them. Yes. And how can I honestly love this boss or this employee if I feel like this boss is just always just trying to find out everything I'm doing wrong, or this employee is jealous and trying to get my position or whatever?
Absolutely. And it guarantees that you can't consider their circumstance. So as soon as you start on that insecurity road, and you say, well, man, why do they think everything I'm doing is wrong? Da, 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 da. Now, it makes it near impossible for you to ask, is their marriage okay?
Exactly.
Is their health okay? I remember them talking about so-and-so having cancer a couple months ago. Has that improved or has it gotten? You won't ask yourself any of those questions about their circumstance because you are so insecure about your own. And so if we don't build people's confidence, if we don't get them comfortable with the idea that they're worth being in a room, that they're worth having their voice heard, and that they have what they need and that they're not that they're not short of something, then people can develop the capacity, because you can't give what you don't have. And so once you have that and you have some security, think about I challenge anyone who's watching or listening to think about anyone they really are at odds with and just explore their life for just a couple moments, and they will find some very significant insecurity. And that is almost always the foundational element of that negative behavior, of envy, of comparison, of whatever. That's what a lot of it is, especially right now where people struggle with comparison, is because if you want to be something special, if you want to be something unique, you probably shouldn't expect company, right? Most of the world, by definition, is average. Not by insult, by definition is average. So if you want to do something special or extraordinary, chances are it's not going to be a ton of people. So when you go to try to be yourself in a world that's not like you, and you look out there for something to measure against, you naturally have to compare. But you naturally compare people in the wrong circumstance. You compare the beginning of your story to the middle of somebody else's story. You compare what their story looks like versus what your story is. You know, it makes it so impossible for you to actually get an accurate idea of what you might look like in the world. And so you have to get comfortable with the idea of not seeing yourself in the world. And that's scary. That's scary because in most people's minds, being the only one is a bad thing. You know, being the only one is a bad thing because the confirmation, the validation comes from being so worthy that people want 2 or 3 or 4. You know what I mean? And people are not comfortable with the idea of being the only one.
Mm-hmm. A second ago, you just talked about just how that, everyone is, if you're really looking into other people's lives, the reality is that everyone's got something going on, behind the curtain that you can't see,
sure.
Because we're all broken people. None of us are perfect, no matter how I've mentioned on the podcast several times how my perfectionism gene and how it just is like this thing that I'm just continually working on and laying before the Lord. But the reality is that every single one of us is broken.
Yeah.
And that Res Gen, we're just trying to say, look, the more we are conformed into the likeness of Christ, as we become more and more like Christ, we're going to understand, how loved we are. Number one, so understanding that, hey, we can live love like we are loved, and the more we are servant-hearted, the more that we are meek, the way that we are confident in Christ, the more that we are this, that's going to automatically make us have better working environments. That's going to make us be more engaged dads or more, in the weeds husbands or whatever. And so, I love the idea of saying that, for us to understand that it's okay to love ourselves. And I know that one of the things that like I was even talking with my youngest son about this when we're on these college tours, is saying, hey, it's okay to tell this professor that, I'm really good at math or I'm really good at whatever. But my youngest son is like, I just don't want to sound arrogant. And I'm like, bud, but that's the reality.
Right.
Like, I mean,
it's factual.
You're actually pretty good at it. And it's okay to say you're good at it. But you got to get comfortable with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's an idea based on what I know. We want to account for every possibility when we say things like that. You know what I mean? Like, am I the best person at math ever in the history of math? Maybe
No.
not. I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know. Yeah. But as far as I know, by all the measures that I have, right? By my tests, by understanding what I'm going through with my peers, based on what my teachers have told me, based on the work that I have put in, I reasonably believe that I'm good at this thing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be absolute. It doesn't have to be for forever. And I'm willing to grow in it and be better in it and that type of thing. And so sometimes when people want it, they're afraid of it showing up in court and it turns out you're not actually the best person. What does that even mean? You know what I mean? And I always tell people, listen, if I think I'm good at something, and you find somebody better at me than it, introduce me to him.
Yeah, I want to learn.
I want to learn. What am I missing?
Yeah.
That's the way that we can approach these things, where you can feel good about what you're doing, understanding there's an opportunity to be better, and respecting that the confidence that you have comes from the work that you put in, your willingness to engage with other people who are good at this thing and not create your own universe where you're great over here and not in the world. Those type of things. And understanding how to do that in a measured way allows you to feel confident in what it is you're doing, and understand that there's always an opportunity for you to be better. Because at the end of the day, the last thing you want to do on earth is be done. What are you going to do? You know what I mean? Like, so if you're here, there's something to do, and embrace that, enjoy that, be a part of that, be one with that. And your life is going to be not fulfilling, refilling. This is one of the things we challenge people with. A lot of people want a fulfilling job. Nothing worth doing is going to leave you full. It's going to take from you. It's going to take time. It's going to take energy. It's going to take pressure on your relationships. It's going to take. So what you're really looking for is a refilling job. You're looking for something that, as it takes, it has the ability to renew.
You're able to
take it back in.
Yeah.
That is the thing that is, and that for a lot of people is a core part to their faith, is that I can give and I can be restored. I can be renewed. It will come back to me in abundance.
Yeah.
So that I can continue,
Yeah, it's the scarcity mindset versus the mindset that is like, hey, it's an abundance.
It really is.
I mean, and so think of it, if we all came to work with an abundance mindset.
Man.
I mean, how would that change the work culture?
That's really what it is. It's really what it is. It's coming to work and saying, I affect this thing. So a lot of people, they think about culture like something that they see in a gallery. They looking at the frame and they can see the picture and they can see everything that's wrong with it, but they're not in it. And what we have to get people to understand is that you're in the frame, right? Whatever this culture is not in spite of you, it's because of you, right? And so whatever that energy is, you've contributed to. And so when people develop the courage and the belief that they can come to a place and affect it, and they understand that they are responsible to helping to create the environment that they want to be in, and no one can make it ready for them. There's no ready-made environment you can go into that are going to fit you perfectly. How? And so you bear the responsibility of making yourself happy, not because other people shouldn't participate, but because you're the only one that knows how. And so because you're the one that knows how to make you happy, you are most responsible for your happiness. So when you come to the space, you come with that energy, and you have to have the courage. Many people don't fully take advantage of their culture because they don't have the courage to. And it sounds weird, but it's a real big piece of it, because you might have an environment where you can go into your boss and you can challenge them to be better, but you don't have the courage to knock on the door. You might have an environment where people really want to hear your ideas and really are willing to implement them, but you don't want to stand your idea up to challenge, or you don't want to present it because you don't want to sound silly. You might have an environment where you could be emotional and people will be empathetic for you, but you are afraid to cry because you don't want to look weak. There are certain parts of a culture you can only access through courage. You can only access when you come to them. It's no different than spiritually. If you cannot lay it down, if you can't come clean,
Right.
you can't access this. It's not that it's not available for you.
Yeah.
You cannot access it unless you come with courage. And that's one of the things that we almost never teach people is courage, because in most people's lives, you're being taken care of. Like your teacher's taking care of the student, the parent is taking care of the child, the boss is taking care of the employee. And we don't get them in a situation where we help them build courage so that they can take care of themselves.
Yeah, that's good, Bunny. I like that. And, as you're talking, it makes me think of what I call the thermostat, the thermostat principle of just saying, like, as men, this was one of the challenges that I gave men last year at the summit, was that you're the thermostat of your home. Are you setting your home to be a place of warmth or a place of that's cold and unapproachable? When you go to work, we all have. Some of us probably grew up in homes where you were told you could never touch the thermostat because that was like, no, do not raise or lower that air conditioning, or heat or whatever. Do not touch the thermostat. But what you're saying is very similar to like this thermostat principle that I have. It's just that everybody can go in and set the temperature of the room that they're in. we all have, regardless of where you're at on the ladder or the payroll or whatever, we can come in and we can set that thermostat. And that is something that we can control.
Yep.
But it does take courage to figure out, okay, how do I do that most effectively in the different environments that I'm in?
For sure. It's impossible not to. You cannot walk into a room and have a null impact. You will either improve the room through positivity, or you will diminish the room through negativity. It is impossible for you to have a null impact. It just is. And that is a responsibility and a power a lot of people don't have, because what hurts people more than anything is not being loved and not being hated. It's being ignored. It's apathy, right? And so some people have fallen into a space where they feel like, again, it's a null impact. No one cares if I'm here or not. It doesn't really matter either way. It absolutely does. Every single element of it does. And you go in with intention is the choice to say, I'm going to affect this room. And that's what we mean by intentional culture. It is saying, I'm making the choice to affect the room in this way so that I don't inadvertently affect it in that way. All of us have hurt someone before with our words, for instance, right? We've all hurt someone with our words. And we may not have intended to hurt them with their words, but we weren't being intentional about not hurting them with our words. And that's the power of intention. It leaves, when you are not being intentional, it leaves space for the unintentional to happen. But when we're being intentional, the likelihood of something other than what we intend diminishes. And so now we start to create results that we design. We create results that are in line with our value system and our principles. And that's where we get something that is of our own making. And when you are in the space of your own making, you develop ownership. And when you develop ownership, then you are connected to all of the things that are happening. You're more likely to be able to adjust as things happen.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got just a few more minutes that that we're going to break down just a couple more things. So just about a month ago, you did CultureCon 2022. And the whole theme was ideas worth doing.
Yeah.
Okay. And you just mentioned about like every day there's stuff to do. You know, like we're not done. Every day we're stuff. And I love that. So I'd love for you just kind of what are some of the things that that maybe you or Tamian shared, some nuggets, just some nuggets that you can kind of nutshell for us that came out of that that would be beneficial for listeners.
Well, a couple of things. One is that we have the power and we have the responsibility to do, and that knowledge isn't power. Applied knowledge is power. And so all of those things have to put us into a place where we can actually bring these things to bear, that we can put these ideas into action. So that's one thing, is that you have the power to, thus you have the responsibility to, right? With power comes great responsibility.
Ooh, Uncle Ben. That's Uncle.
Exactly.
That's straight up Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, man.
I think that actually goes back. I think that's Lincoln, actually. But I think...
Well, I mean, equally as good of a man.
For our purposes, we'll go with Uncle Ben. But, you know, it is. I mean, it is a great responsibility. And that's one of those things that we have to own. The other thing is just to say, if we're going to do something, let's do it together, and let's do it for the purpose of bettering our environment and our community for each other. The biggest thing for us that we try to do, particularly with CultureCon, is bring people into the space similar to what you've done, is bring people to a space and say, listen, you are loved here.
Yeah.
You are safe here. And we have come here today to be in each other's energy and to leave this space energized and educated and knowing that we're not alone to go do great in the world and affect our environment and our culture in the best way that we know how. That's why we're here. And when we talk about ideas worth doing, we're talking about if it's worth it. If it matters, then we have to do it. If it doesn't matter, okay, whatever. But when we talk about love, when we talk about principles, when we talk about values, when we talk about compassion, when we talk about healing our world, those things have to be done. And who's going to do them? We can't wait for somebody else to do them. You have to go out and do it. Now, do you have to do it all? No, but you have to do a part, and you have to do it consistently. That's what we're talking about. If everybody does that and takes that level of ownership, we got a real chance for change. We got a real chance to do something special. But if everybody's just going to spend their time barking at their TV or giving their opinion at 240 characters at a time, we ain't got a shot. We don't have a shot. So those were some of the major themes that we wanted to get across to folks, is to be able to say, number one, you have the power to do, so you have the responsibility to do. Number two, you don't have to do it alone. You're supported and you're cared for, and we have to do it for the right reasons. And then again, that last thing is that the bottom line is a byproduct, right? That's a byproduct. The dollars and cents of it, that I always say, money is a tool. If I told you I would drop $1 billion on your lawn, you would probably want it. If I told you that I was going to drop $1 billion on your lawn, but you couldn't spend it, nor could anyone else, you wouldn't want it, because it'd be $2 billion. It'd be 2 tons of paper on your lawn. and the moral of the story is, it's not the money, it's what you could do with it, right? So money is a tool, but you would never get your identity from a hammer, right? You would never get your self-worth from a saw. Why would you get it from money? It's a tool to help you do a thing, and the thing you're trying to do is to be happy, to be healthy, and to connect. And we can do that. And as money is a byproduct of that, win. But that's not the goal. That's not what we're trying to do. And it's a major shift, because it's scary for people to think about that. How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that if I don't have money? How are you going to do that if you do have money, but you don't have relationships? You don't have self-worth. You don't, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so that's really what we try to push to folks. And then the last thing I'll just say is, we want to encourage people to do stuff that has nothing to do with us at all. You know what I mean? We want to put people in that room to connect in ways we could never imagine, to do things we would have never thought of. Mm-hmm. That's really what the point is.
Yeah, and sometimes, like you just said, the connectivity with one another is what helps us have the courage to step out and do those things.
Yes.
Because a lot of times when we feel like we're alone, there's strength in numbers, and the affirmation that comes from people saying, no, I think you really can do this. I think you really do have what it takes to accomplish your dreams, the goals, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's great. Well, Vonnie, this has been number one. It's been fast, man. It's been fast and furious. I looked at the clock. I'm like, oh my gosh, we've already been talking like for a full episode, for crying out loud, and we're just kind of breaking the surface on a lot of these things. I know you and I could talk all day, but thanks for spending some time here at the Giving Life podcast booth, and this has been so much fun, and thanks for the work that you're doing to invest in people and communities both in and out of Sioux Falls, and the way that you're speaking life into people. The tagline of the Giving Life podcast is "Men whose life in Christ gives life to others." And our goal is that we are raising up an army of, we have a lot of gals to listen to, but specifically an army of men who just say, you know what, man, every day I strive to become more and more like Christ, and every day I strive to give more and more life to every person I come into relationship with, because of that relationship. And so thank you for doing that. I know that you and Tamian are tireless in this endeavor, and you do it well. And so I thank you for sharing some of your wisdom and things that you're seeing out there with all of us. But you're not quite done yet, okay? Because here's what we got. I did tell you this was coming. We end our podcast every episode with something I call the final word, just 60 to 90 seconds of whatever the Lord brings to your mind, or any kind of encouragement, challenge, just a final challenge that they can take with them.
Yeah. The big thing for me is people embracing and appreciating the value of existence, and that you are here because you are supposed to be. And there's no greater proof of that than the fact that you're here, right? And because you're here, you have an opportunity and a responsibility to impact the world. And my personal mission statement is to teach others how to love, starting with themselves. And I think if everybody just really spends some time trying to love themselves, because the better you is better for everyone, you have a chance to make an impact on this world that has ripples that you'll never be able to truly wrap your mind around. But you can do it. You must do it, right? To truly be in tune with yourself. And that's the only way to find yourself, is to put yourself out in the world and to say, I am here because I'm supposed to be, I have value, and I can contribute. And if everybody does that, they'll find their true selves, and they'll find their true voice, and they'll be happy.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, Vonnie. Well, hey, thanks again for being here. Greatly appreciate your friendship and partnership, and we'll chat again here real soon.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Vonnie today. As always, if you found this episode helpful, I encourage you to share it with others that may find it helpful as well. Also, don't forget to take 30 seconds to rate and review the podcast. If you'd like to connect more with Bonnie and Think3D, you can find him on all the usual social media channels and at letsthink3d.com. All right. Thanks again for joining me today, everybody. We'll see you next time for another episode of the ResGen Giving Life podcast. Until then, continue striving to be men whose life in Christ gives life to others. See ya.